Hello, I'm Janet Legge.
And I'm Natalie Eggins.
And together with our fabulous teams, we deliver the ACT online qualifications, assessments and training.
These globally recognised qualifications have helped thousands of professionals start their career in Treasury and advance to strategic leadership roles in their organisations.
Our qualifications are forward-thinking and relevant and will provide you with all the knowledge and skills needed to excel in every level of your career.
Here's a quick snapshot of how it works.
Our qualifications recognise previous experience and studies, and you may be able to fast track onto a higher level.
Once you've chosen the qualification that's right for you, you can start whenever you're ready using our online resources.
Throughout the course, you are not alone. We provide support through webinars, podcasts, quizzes and practice exams, as well as online discussions, tutor support and forums.
We also offer online training for your personal development needs, gaining practical skills to make a real impact at work.
All our assessments are delivered online using remote invigilation, so you can even sit them from the comfort of your own home. Simply book your assessment when you are ready.
Once qualified and become a member, you'll be eligible to use the ACT designatory letters, a mark of distinction that certifies your commitment to the highest professional standards.
Our friendly programme managers are here to help at any time.
We look forward to welcoming you to the ACT. Welcome everyone to this panel session, which forms part of the Festival of Treasury Transformation. Today, we'll be talking about the future of learning and professional qualifications, and we have a wide variety of experts here to share their views and knowledge in the areas of learning and professional development. Before we begin, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Janet Legge, the Director of Awarding Body at the ACT. My background is very much in the education sector for the last 14 years. Where I've been working at places like Pearson and City and Guilds. And my passion very much has been in digital transformation, innovation and change. And with almost all of the projects I've worked on, they've been around moving from paper to online. So when I came to the ACT 3 years ago and realized that we were doing online invigilation and assessment, it felt like a natural fit for me. But 4 years later, as we enter the world today where we're facing challenges with COVID, the ACT is in a really good place from our assessment perspective in that they're basically running as business as usual. And it's put us in a really interesting position to look forward to ways in which we need to address what's happening in the world, look at the way in which learning and professional qualifications need to change to meet the needs of some of the challenges that we're facing today. So without further ado, I'd like to ask my panel to introduce themselves, and I'll start alphabetically. So Adrian, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Thank you very much, Janet, and very pleased to be here. So my name is Adrian Sargent. I have recently undertaken the Advanced Diploma in Treasury Management, so thankfully I passed that earlier this year. So I come with that sort of insight to the future of learning as well, and having gone through that new qualification. But also it's been a year of change. So I recently set up ESG Treasury on the 1st of March this year, just ahead of COVID-19, lockdown, breakout, and all that has brought with us, or brought with it, should I say. And that came after 20 or so years or more of Treasury experience in multinational banks, asset managers, and having started my career in brewing, where I got my accounting qualification. So, you know, quite a diverse background there, but also looking forward to a bright new future.
Excellent, thanks Adrian. Amanda, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. I'm Amanda Bradley. I spent 20 years in corporate finance. I'm an accountant. I'm a fellow of the Association of Corporate Treasurers. But since 2014, I've moved more into coaching and psychology. I'm managing director of a company called Liberty EQ, and we provide the tutoring for the strategic influencing segment of the Advanced Diploma in Treasury Management that Adrian sat last year. As well as a coach, treasurer, accountant, I'm also a qualified psychotherapeutic counsellor.
Lovely. Thanks, Amanda. I'm looking forward to hearing more thoughts on how we deliver softer skills virtually later in the session. Chris, how about you next?
Yes, thanks, Janet, and thanks for having me on this session. My name is Chris van Dijl. I'm a former group treasurer who, after a very varied career across Europe, US, and the Middle East, decided to set up Cugavadi about 6 years ago now and focus on treasury consultancy and training. And as part of that, I'm now also the trainer for Cert ICM at the ACT.
Lovely, thanks Chris. And as you know, we've been refreshing our cash management qualifications recently, so I'm sure our listeners will be keen to hear how we make learning even more interesting later. And last but not least, Marc.
Yeah, hi Janet. Look, thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you also for Amanda and Adrian and Chris and for helping to make this happen. Well, my name is Marc Granville. I am the Head of Executive Education at the International Capital Markets Association, or ICMA or ICMA, depending on the way you like to say it. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, ICMA is a global membership association that promotes well-functioning international cross-border debt securities markets. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we used to be the Association of International Bond Dealers, and over the last sort of 50 or 60 years have evolved into a much larger membership association. We have about 590 odd members, institutional members at the moment, spanning about 60 odd countries. So like ACT, part of our mission involves encouraging best practice standards, and we do that in part by offering professional development training that kind of reflects current market practices and trends and regulations and things like that. So I've been running the education team at ICMA for a little over a year now, but I've been involved in education for about 20 years in different guises across the world, New Zealand, Australia, and Middle East and Europe, and now I'm in London. And I think also like Janet, I'm particularly interested in the sort of the opportunities afforded by digital education, and I suppose in particular sort of how digital education can improve learning outcomes. So, you know, how pedagogical approaches to online teaching have gradually sort of become more refined, and the opportunities that this format offers. So there's a lot around this space that I'm really looking forward to speaking about and contributing to, hopefully.
Great, thanks Marc. And it's lovely to have another professional body as part of this discussion, because I think at the moment it's so important that we work together and try and learn from each other, and do things really for the benefit of our students and members. But also we can't always all do it all on our own. It's nice to get ideas from other people as well. So. Lovely. So thanks everyone for introducing ourselves. And I think really the first area we should touch on, which is kind of the elephant in the room, is to get your thoughts on the impact of COVID from an educational perspective. We know that learning builds resilience, and in this period where people are facing a number of challenges, both personally and professionally, do you think we will see an increase in people taking up learning? And how do you see it impacting or enhancing people's attitudes to learning and qualifications? So Amanda, are we happy to start with you?
Yeah, sure. Really interesting question. I think there's been something that's been happening as a shift over the last few years anyway, in terms of online learning as a growth market. And that's really giving people unparalleled access to experts. So you only have to look at the adverts, things like Masterclass. You can now have a directing lesson from Martin Scorsese, which you wouldn't have had access to in the normal world. But there's some things that happen with online learning which are really useful, like removing the barrier of embarrassment that might come from joining a language class, or being able to get access to some resources that you wouldn't otherwise get. So there's a great deal of democratizing happening in learning. You don't need to leave the house. You can fit it around other requirements of family and work. So there's huge capacity. One thing I will say though is that there's also so much choice. It's really hard for people to work out what they want to learn now. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed watching the ACT do is packaging it into, if you want to do this, then. So there's curation needed of all of this learning. because if we're given too much choice, we can actually start to feel overwhelmed by it. But certainly something that, you know, many of us found in lockdown is that having the ability to take some time to learn something new, I've always wanted to learn ... has really helped. If I think about it in the professional context, that curation of learning though becomes even more important because we're all time poor. And so having a very clear understanding of our developmental need, of what it is you need to learn, where your gap is, and the thing that makes you worry at 2 in the morning that you're not very good at, you know what that is and you can identify that. And then there's an easy way to access it, like the ACT's learning portal. You know, we're really setting people in good stead to be able to fill some gaps that that otherwise they might have not had the capacity to gain access to, because, you know, you let people tailor their own courses then through online learning.
Absolutely. And I think as well, people are finding it quite challenging from a time perspective, because the lines between work and personal are blurring as well, aren't they?
Absolutely.
So it's hard to get that balance right, I think. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on exactly what you mentioned, Janet. Because everybody's now working from home, you might think that people actually now can take up a lot of e-learning, but actually it has been a lot in the news that people actually work more and more hours since they work from home. And if you then throw in the mix homeschooling and kids running around at school, perhaps it all depends on the situation of what that person fits in. If it's a single person, it might be easy because it has time to spare and it can use on training. So I think it really depends on the personal circumstance of the person, but there's definitely a lot more availability now for e-learning, for developing your skills as well. And I think what the whole COVID brings on a more general terms, it will put more emphasis on the whole work-life balance, even when everybody goes back to the office. And maybe we should start redefining it, not a work-life balance, but a work-study life balance, that people can actually find time and employers will give time for people to spend time out of the office. And if that happens, then definitely e-learning will definitely become much more prevalent around, definitely.
That's a really positive thought. I like that spin as well, actually, because I don't think we are really going to ever go back to what it was before. So it's looking at how we would into a new world, isn't it? Lovely. Marc, you have just relaunched your qualifications digitally.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that and sort of how your students and members are responding to the challenges today?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the plug. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, we've just launched a series of courses, and it's interesting to talk about the choice. You know, we've launched a series of self-study courses and live stream courses, and we've seen a lot of interest in what we're doing. You know, both on a kind of a public schedule, so individuals joining our courses, to, you know, sort of institutional in-house stuff, which is good. But I think, I mean, although we've been involved in online learning for a little while, it hasn't been in a particularly significant way. And I think what the pandemic has really brought home to us is that rather than using, I think, online learning as just a Band-Aid type of approach to cover, you know, 2020 and having to cancel classroom-based courses, that we're looking at it in a much more sort of long-term, sustainable way. So, I mean, to give you some context, I think over the last 3 years, the amount of activity that ICMA education was involved in was roughly 85 to 90% in a face-to-face environment, right? Whether that be, again, on that public or in-house schedule. And I think that even if you ignore 2020 as an outlier, I don't think we will ever go back to that degree of classroom to digital again. And I don't honestly think we will see classroom-based training sort of dominate the landscape like that in any training institution. I think in terms of people's attitudes towards online learning, I think if anything positive comes out of the pandemic, I think it will be that more people do engage with online learning, both because, you know, as Chris referred to, I think it's a very productive way to spend increasing amounts of downtime for some people. But I think also, and quite importantly, online learning is one way to address some of the changes that are going to come, especially to the financial services industry. I mean, I think a lot of organisations in the sector are going to be thinking about the ways that they're going to need to operate in whatever the new normal is, and what skills they're going to need to help them make those changes that are coming. And I think a lot of people will see these changes kind of as an opportunity, and hopefully start thinking about ways that they can acquire these new skills. And I think online learning can really play a big part in that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, that was really interesting as well. And we did some research earlier this year about shared service centres that said that providing learning and development opportunities for their employees has a massive positive correlation with staff retention. And I think it is important, isn't it, that employers are seen to be investing in their people and making sure they've got the skills that are needed. So, Adrian, you recently qualified FCT. How if you were doing it now and COVID-19 was happening, would you have changed your decision? Would you have looked for something else? What are your thoughts on where we are at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Janet. So, I mean, that with COVID-19, I think it would have made me think harder. Do I have the time to dedicate to it? What's happening with COVID-19? What's the employment prospects, or what's going on in my own employment journey at that particular time? But for the qualification itself, the advanced diploma is unique. I don't think there are many others that are around the world from that. So therefore, if you want to do the advanced diploma, then there's few other options that are there. So there's an element there that is unique about that particular aspect. And when I was looking at the qualification and looking at the study, or how you studied for it, the remote aspect of it anyway was appealing. Not being London based, and also then having sort of been on the course and finding out the global nature of some of the attendees and some of the students there as well. I think the diploma is, or the way that sort of the ACT is set up, certainly can have that global reach, and therefore your own geographic location isn't necessarily an issue. One item that was good was the residential. There was a weekend there, 3 days, residential course. It allowed you to meet others on the course, share experiences, and get some sort of network there as well, which it's been good. Many of us have kept in touch post that. So, in a post-COVID-19 world, do people want to travel as much? How do you create that community as well as a challenge to look at for the future? And will people want to travel to create that community? Or, as we're all more tech savvy, Zoom savvy, Teams or whichever medium we use, can we now create a community online? And I think the answer to that is yes. Because there's certainly many people since starting the business and looking at sustainability, I now talk to a number of individuals around the world on collaborative ideas, and that all happens online, on Zoom, or by the telephone. And we actually have got a good rapport and are building good relationships there. So it can certainly be achieved online. It just needs to be done slightly differently. So I think it would have made me think harder, but I still would have wanted to do the qualification for the qualification and the study material itself. And it was already sort of largely remote as well, which was good.
Excellent, thank you. So that sort of leads us very nicely onto our second area we're going to explore a little bit, which is around sort of what we feel a post-COVID world will look like. And I think everyone has touched on this to some extent. Will it have created or forced through changes in learning style, preferences, delivery? And Adrian, you obviously mentioned our residential element of the advanced diploma, which Amanda and I are working on an alternative for at the moment, since we couldn't deliver it in May face-to-face as normal. So actually, Amanda, I'm going to start with you again, if you don't mind. But how do we teach or train virtually these leadership skills that generally, I think we're all under the perception are so much better delivered face to face.
Well, I think one of the great things that's happened with COVID is that a lot of our perceptions have had to be set aside. So when we first started talking about how do we deliver this, we looked at the layout of the course, and a lot of it can be brought online. And actually, when I started thinking in greater detail about it, it actually makes a lot of sense online as a collaborative experience, because behavioural change, I've always had a problem with the fact that we go away for maybe 2 days and you sit in a boardroom and you practice with people that you may or may not know how to have difficult conversations or how to be more assertive or whatever. Then you go back to your desk and you put the lovely binder that you get given into a drawer and you never do it again. Whereas one of the things that's quite nice about this style that we're going to be forced into if lockdown and various travel restrictions and so forth continue is the ability to break it into bite-sized chunks and actually go, okay, fine, we're going to do this. Now go away, practice it for a week, come back and tell me how it went, and keep a learning log, and let's look at it as you go along, so that people actually then have a chance to practice behavioural change, because it takes at least, you know, there's some research that suggests that you have to do it for 6 weeks to actually have change take place. So there's an awful lot of benefit to it. The joy of things like Teams and Zoom is the ability to put people into small rooms as well. So we can still do the experiential learning where you practice something in a triad and one's observing and two are giving it a go, and then you all feed back to each other and try again. And it also hoiks you back into the central room so that you can then do a bit more learning together. The bit that you lose, and I think the shame of it, is really the bit that Adrian was talking about with reference to meeting peers and building a network. When we've all been on Zoom all day for work, it's really hard to force ourselves to go on Zoom in the evening. I'm meant to be going on Zoom to see some friends tonight, and I'm looking forward to seeing them, and I'm dreading being on Zoom. And it isn't quite the same having a Zoom cocktail party, you know, it just doesn't work in quite the same way. So there's something in here about how we need to get cuter about the communal side. But I believe that we can still do the experiential learning. Some of the face-to-face is harder. You know, some of the stuff you get in the face-to-face side, it's hard to grab a whiteboard and write. And I think that the thing that's going to make the big difference as people move is to resist the temptation just to video everything and shove it out, because you've got to be able to have the interaction. There might be some stuff where you can send a video and just send the video out and everyone watches it in their own time. But you do get more from actually being able to ask and answer questions, from being able to hear other people working it out for themselves. So somehow we'll find a balance in that. But I think it's going to be really exciting to see how the tech companies respond to the challenge as well of what people need when they can't be face to face. So I've got great hope about it.
Excellent. And it is exciting, isn't it, to think, I love this kind of stuff anyway, because I think we should explore all things and ways to do things differently. And I think you're right as well about the tech companies, because we just see more and more online, you know, video calling functionalities and softwares bringing different things as well to the table. So it's probably a pretty good industry to be in at the moment too, actually. But I liked your thought as well around, you said about bite-sized chunks. And so Chris, I'm going to come to you as well on this one. You know, Chris, you're our ICM tutor. I know you've got an interest in things like sort of gamification, and you're looking at different ways that we can deliver our learning from the technical side. But also the concept of bite-sized learning seems very popular. People don't want to know they've got 500 hours of learning to do. You know, it's a sort of drop in, drop out. How do you sort of see this impacting what we're delivering for our students?
Well, it might actually be a blessing in disguise in a way, because if you look at the syllabus of the various qualifications, it's a big pack, and that might actually put people off. Yeah, so it might actually be a blessing in disguise that now we have to digitalize everything. We have to do virtual training, e-learning, as they say, and that gives huge opportunity. Yeah, because when you deliver anything on e-learning, you cannot have persons on a Zoom call for 5 hours watching somebody present a PowerPoint presentation remotely. People will drop off. very soon. Yeah, they will say that they're making a coffee. So it's really the important thing is how do we keep people engaged? Yeah, and that's really the most important thing. And the good thing is there's a lot of games and tools and gamification, as we call this, that is available now in the market, and that the ACT is also now incorporating in all the future qualifications. Because what's really important, I think Amanda said it as well. Yes, it's the mix. Yes, you can put your whole syllabus on video and put it on YouTube in 10-minute videos, but that's not it either. But delivering a PowerPoint presentation for 4 hours isn't it either. It needs to be a mix, and especially so you probably need to, what you will see is that you will still have this classroom e-learning with a group, and you have the kind of classroom teaching with everybody online, but that will have to be interacted with a lot of games. Yeah. Okay, we've now had 45 minutes on the subject. Now let's have some fun and let's do a puzzle. Let's do a quiz. Here you have 10 questions. Who can answer them the fastest? All these little things that you can do. And I think this trend has already started a couple of years ago with the companies that provide all this technology. As I said, technology is probably, if you're in the gamification industry, this is probably going to be your best year ever. And I think because there's now such an emphasis on this, there's probably going to be a lot of development in this area as well. So the companies that are there now, they're doing good, but I'm really looking forward on what's coming next. And we're really looking at games that you can play. And this can even be, even when we look at soft skills, it can also incorporate that. So that's all very important. And to come back, what we're trying to look at as well, one of the most important things as well with the CERT ICM and the residential school that Adrian mentioned as well, how can we still get this sort of network going? Yeah, because normally when you are a residential, even when you are at a conference, you hand out business cards the whole time. And this is not the case. So we're really looking, how can we still make it fun? Let people open up, because normally when you do an e-learning, there's a lot less questions. And for the tutor, it's a lot more difficult to gauge if people are actually listening, if they're having a problem with it. And through these games, you can actually learn a lot today. And you see that the students are relaxing more as well, and they're more eager to actually open up and ask more questions. So I think that we're only at the start. There's a lot of tools already for gamification, and that will definitely continue. But as I said, part of the gamification part is to keep it in these little chunks. Yeah, so that big topics get cut into little pieces, whether it's video, whether it's a game, or whether it's e-learning.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's so true. I think there's some really exciting things to do, but it is about thinking differently, isn't it? And moving our perceptions, our ideas, I think, of what we think people want to actually what they need almost, and where we think it's going. So Marc, from your perspective, how have you addressed this element, or are addressing it, or thinking of dealing with it?
Well, I think Chris and Amanda actually bring up a very good point here. You know, one of the most exciting things for us that's happened in terms of looking at our courses, especially some of our longer courses, some of our longer sort of, more advanced benchmark courses, is reviewing them in terms of, how can we restructure these to present them in such a way that they become something really, really valuable in a different environment, right? And how do we incorporate that interactivity into the pedagogical approach that we take, taking into account the various technology we're using. So I think that is really, really exciting. For us, what we've seemed to do is take into account, so a lot of our most popular courses have traditionally been delivered over a week. So someone will come to London, they'll sit in the classroom for a week, they'll listen to a bunch of guests and train of facilitated sort of conversations and so on and so forth. And these are, let's say they're work practical based skills, technical skills. And when you sort of take a step back and say, okay, well, if we have to do this digitally, We've got a lot more space because you can't just expect someone to sit in front of a computer, as Chris said, you can't sit in front of Zoom for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, okay, if we're going to split this over a month, for example, or a little bit longer, and we do it, a couple of days here and there, and how can we use that time most effectively to be able to really communicate those and improve those learning outcomes? So I think it's a really, I agree, it's a really exciting time for us as well. And I think we're learning as much as some of the delegates will be in terms of the composition of how we do that. And actually, I'd just also like to bring up Amanda's point. I think she raised a really interesting point where one of the effects, more the overall effects of the pandemic, is this idea that perceptions have been set aside. And for me, one of the biggest effects has been the changes in organizational perception around productivity, especially in the financial services industry. And basically that it's reevaluating this idea that people's engagement with their job and their related professional development, right, is not confined to physically being in the office. Now, I think in the past we've seen certain groups, creative industries, for example, who have been really very good about engaging with things like flexible working hours, and I think certain groups of people have been very good with engaging with these type of ideas. But in the financial services industry, I'm not sure they really ever bought into that in a very big way. And so I think one of the positives again about the pandemic is that it's kind of been this catalyst to show people in our industry that this idea of flexible working from home, working different hours, so on and so forth, actually does work, right? And I think that realization brings some incredible opportunities around things like learning development and training, and how it means to actually start to engage in this thing. And I think digital learning will play a very big part in that. And I think the final thing that I would say, and I think it goes back to a point that Adrian made earlier, I don't think that face-to-face learning will ever disappear. I really don't. I think that, it's been a big topic of conversation for longer than the pandemic. But I really am I'm a big advocate in it. Earlier, I don't think we'll ever go back to that, 80-90% of what we do is face-to-face, but I think face-to-face learning addresses a particular learning style very, very well. I know for myself, I learn better in a personal environment, right? Now, some people don't. Some people learn, the different learning styles. Some people learn better by listening to podcasts or for watching videos or these type of things. But I think as long as there are enough people whose learning style really suits face-to-face, I think that will continue to happen. That sort of the demand will lead to the ensure the supply sort of thing. And I think also, again, something else that Adrian referred to, there's the networking element, and there's also the reward element. Will people want to travel? To be honest with you, I think they will, because I think part of training is not a massive part of training, but I think there is a significant part of training where a company can say to a high-performing employee, you know what, you've done a really, really great job. We're sending you to London, or we're sending you to Paris, or whatever it is, to do a course for a week. And we really want you to improve your skills and so on and so forth. But we also want you to enjoy yourself. We want you to network, we want you to enjoy it. And I think that sort of element of kind of non-financial reward, so to speak, engenders a lot of loyalty. And I think that's going to remain a popular incentive. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things to consider. Very excited about the reevaluation and the restructuring of our courses. And really excited about the perceptions of productivity. But I do think that face-to-face learning, despite the pandemic, will continue into the future.
Thanks, Mark. That's really interesting. There's two things I just want to pick up that you mentioned. This whole thing about going away to a week-long school, I wonder as well how much of that sometimes is that it's giving those people that time to focus They don't have to fight for it from their employer. They don't have to fight for it from their home. They're actually, it's like, you know what, I'm away for 5 days. Yes, I can turn everything off. I can focus. Whereas now it's, or not now, but it has been quite hard to do that self-study when you know, trying to block out, we know blocking out an hour in your day at work is hard to do. So I think sometimes that face-to-face of that week long, people liked it because it gave them the permission that they needed. They didn't have to fight for it or argue for it. So I think that will be something interesting as well to see how that goes forward with more of this flexible approach that you mentioned as well. And then the other thing I just wanted to comment on was I think sometimes it's hard, isn't it? We all have different ways of learning, but none of us are children. And I don't have any children, but I have a nephew who's 15, and he probably learns in a very different way to how I learned. And he seems to be loving online school. He's in South Africa, and he's loving it. He's actually finding it so much better than being in a classroom. And I think it's an interesting, I don't know if anyone has any comments or wants to jump in here, but how do we make sure that our learning and our qualifications are relevant for the younger generation and not just what we as a kind of generation think is right?
I think that's an interesting one, Janet. Where I go to with that is thinking about learning styles in general, and particularly with reference to special needs. My daughter's dyslexic, and we've found home learning very difficult because so much of the information is being conveyed in writing. So again, it speaks to Chris's point about mixing it all up and giving people the opportunity. And this is where I was talking about in terms of people being able to cherry pick in the learning. There's a lot in the efforts of people in the 20s about personalized design of things. You know, you can personalize your shoes. Why not personalize your learning? I learn better when I listen to something, so I'll go with the podcasts on that one. Thanks. One of the things we did last year with the ACT Advanced Diploma was we were very cognizant of different people's learning styles as we developed the post-course material. And so I don't know if you remember this, Adrian, or used it at all, but there was a book or a podcast or a video for every learning element, because it's really important that we as educators address the needs of our audience rather than what's easiest for us. Now, I've sat through endless PowerPoint because that's easiest for the presenter, but that doesn't mean it's going to get the message across best. So I think it's a really useful staging post for us to think about how to reach audiences in a way that's going to matter for them as well.
And on that point, I don't think that face-to-face learning is going to go. I don't think we're going to go all the way to the end and we don't have this anymore. I think it will be a mix, and it will probably be an option. Yeah, so you probably have a e-learning course of any ACT qualification, but then maybe, you know, this is just thinking out loud, maybe there is an option to have a one-day course with a trainer, yeah, that you can sign up to, and the course is 3 times a year, so you can join when you want, for example. But it's not compulsory, and if you rather just read the book, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and then if you are taking the course from the other side of the world, it doesn't mean you have to jump on a far plane journey that you might not want to take. Yeah, so I think it will have to be a lot of mix-up, loads of opportunities. As Amanda said, loads of different ways of delivering the same information, and some people learn better, as Amanda said, by listening to somebody, interacting with a tutor, and some people really just want to read, and that's all they want to do. They memorize the book, and that's how they learn. And I think that's how it will be forward. It will be a complete mix-up, and that's the interesting thing, and it will be a little bit of a hit and miss, which is the interesting thing that we're going through now, because it's uncharted territory in some way. We have to find out what's the best way of delivering every subject, whether it's a soft skill or a hard technical skill, right? And that's what we have to go through, and that's why the next year or so is going to be so very exciting.
One of the things there that strikes me as well, and you know, looking about homeschooling and the like, making a link there, everyone's different. But, you know, so I think it's going to be more difficult for those educational establishments and trainers because you have to be many things to all people. and so therefore, you have to, I believe, offer both physical, face-to-face, online tutorials, phone calls, reading materials, podcasts, videos. I think, having a suite of different materials that support a course and allows someone to choose what meets their requirements. And, I've worked in the city. I know how busy you can be in many roles. I know how roles can take up your life, and then you've got your family life as well. So you might just have when I was in London, there was a train journey. I read lots of books because it sort of allowed me to relax, allowed me to chill out, but I had the time. So I've never read as many books because don't commute as much. So it depends what the learning style is for the individual. So I think the lesson here is that those that are providing educational facilities need to not be monoline, need to be multi-line, but then there's got to be clarity in how that's delivered and making it clear for the students as well. So there's an interesting thing there, and face to face from my perspective, it's good for the softer skills. When you're doing the softer skills, I think that's where, actually reflecting on that, softer skills are just as important online. And like we're talking today, you will still have to have more softer skills, more softer skill training for how do you agree or negotiate a contract online? How do you talk about different issues without physically going around and seeing somebody in the flesh? Because you can look in the whites of their eyes, you can tell whether they're, or how you think they're behaving. So how do you do that when you've only got a phone call or a video conference? So it's an interesting challenge, and I think the softer skills are the ones that will be more difficult to do online, but still the challenge in there is a reasonable one that you still need to deliver the training online. So it's one that needs to be tackled.
Yeah, that was really interesting points, and I'm sort of sitting here going, oh, okay. Marc and I have work to do. But it brings us really nicely, I think, onto our next question, which is about sort of the topic and content of qualifications and learning, and whether there's a shift in focus on what is important. And Treasury has historically been quite a technical specialism, but we did some research in our business of Treasury this year, and more treasurers are looking for strategic development, want to focus on the softer skills. So, and Adrian, I'm going to start with you because you're a practitioner. How do we get that balance right between the soft skills and the technical? And is there a perfect balance we can achieve, or is it, do we just sort of go with the need?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, in many roles, the technical experience is assumed. So many individuals that do particular roles, then that technical experience is something that is assumed to be there. But people need to learn it, so they either need to learn that technical experience on the job, through on-the-job training, or through qualifications. So there's very much a place there for the technical elements to be able to be understood, debated, and allow the individuals a safe environment, to try and understand those concepts. Some individuals might not want to open up in the office if they're not quite so sure on particular concepts. So therefore, having a training course to sort of reaffirm their understanding on the technical aspects is good. But it then comes into the application of those. So the softer skills is when you start to apply those technical skills. And the more senior you get, the more those softer skills become important. But it doesn't mean that at the start of your career, they're not important. It just means that you're interacting perhaps with more people, and the decisions that you are influencing become more important the more senior you get. So I think softer skills and technical skills come hand in hand. And in order to do a particular role, you need to be technically competent. In order to do that role well, you need to be competent at the softer skills. So that's something where the balance is important. And as you start to develop teams, whether they're direct line responsibility or other individuals that work with you throughout the company that you're working in, or throughout the industry that you're working throughout, then those influencing skills and how to build rapport, how to make sure you're all working collaboratively together, and how to deal with difficult discussions. you know, where that collaboration isn't working and where the contract negotiations aren't going well, or delivery items on particular projects aren't going well. How do you tackle those difficult conversations? How do you think about them strategically? How do you overcome them as well? Is very important. So, you know, technical is still very important, and that's almost a must-have, and in many roles assumed. And the softer skills then come to a great level of importance to be able to do the job properly.
Great thoughts on that. Marc, are you seeing a similar challenge in your sector?
Yeah, I mean, this has been an interesting one for ICMA actually. We have discussed on a number of occasions, and even since I've been there, so over the last year, whether or not we want to sort of expand out into incorporating soft skills courses into our portfolio. And to be honest, we've always decided against it. And I think the reason for that is that our USP really lies in our relationship and our proximity to the market, right? And in that space, we can offer our delegates, or we feel we can offer our delegates something that, say, a business school whose focus was more towards the academic couldn't, right? So for us, offering a course on, say, leadership or strategy theory or something, it doesn't really fit with the strengths of the association. And so far, we've kind of resisted it, and we've focused on, I don't want to say technical based, but certainly practical based work courses. However, and there's a big caveat here, and I agree with Adrian's point. I think this, you know, quite often people talk about this dichotomy between technical skills and soft skills, and I don't necessarily agree with that dichotomy so much. I think that if you were to look at some of our courses, which would be, you know, some of the courses that we have around sort of view-based fixed income securities, these type of things. So you're looking at how to construct a portfolio of fixed income products, or you're learning how inflation-linked bonds and derivatives would work, these type of things. I think these courses already incorporate non-technical elements, right? Like, you know, learning to trust your own judgment, or learning not to get carried away with irrational behavior, or learn how not to be influenced by your peers, these type of things. And I think these non-technical elements are already embedded, although albeit I think probably unconsciously in many ways, into the curriculum of the course itself, you know. So I kind of agree with Adrian that it does go hand in hand. But I think ultimately, although ICMA itself will probably continue to focus more on the technical work-based things, because again, I agree. I mean, the financial services, you need to know these sort of technical things to do your job well in many ways. I agree in terms of the more senior you get, the more important these non-technical skills become. I think looking into the future, I think non-technical skills like, you know, thinking creatively, of communicating well, more specifically maybe like leading teams remotely, right? I think these are going to be more important than ever. And this is not just because of future pandemics, right? This is because you look at the impact of AI, for example, that's having on the financial services industry. So, you know, I think people will continue to need technical skills, but I don't know, for me, I'm encouraging my kids to learn and try and engage in as many sort of diverse activities as they can, because I think it's going to be very, very difficult to predict what technical skills they learn today, whether these technical skills they learn today might be relevant tomorrow, you know, whereas I think the softer skills will continue to serve people, well, at least as far as into the future, I'm willing to look for it that way.
Absolutely, that's a really good point, because I was just sitting here when I was listening to you, and I've seen many slides in education conferences and things that say that the skills that we need in the future are around the softer skills. Those are the important things that machines and robots cannot do for us, whereas things like programming and coding, a machine can do. So Amanda and Chris, do you have any thoughts on this conversation that you want to add in?
Well, I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think everybody agrees that we're moving, especially if we focus on Treasury. Treasury used to be the guys in the ivory tower, yeah, that didn't talk to the business and they did their own things and nobody really knew who they were. Yeah, but this has really changed, and you see treasurers becoming much more involved in the business. They're becoming much more central. They're becoming business partners, right? And especially when we're talking about cash forecasting, you want very good cash forecasting. You really need to understand your business. So it's not just about knowing how a payment is made or how to place a deposit or do an FX. It's really, if you're a manufacturing company, you have to know how the manufacturing process works. So you really need to get that business understanding. Yeah, that is very important. You need to get really much more. You need to get much more business, strategic, and commercial knowledge, yeah, and acumen to really be able to thrive as a treasurer. Yeah, and of course, to interact with senior, the higher you go, Adrian and Marc said it very well, you need all the soft skills. Now, of course, the question is, where do I get this training from? Yeah, should this come from my professional body? Yeah, if I'm a treasurer, I go to the ACT. If I'm a bond trader, I go to the ICMA. It might be that there is an opportunity for some cross-professional organization studies to say that, well, actually, soft skills trading, how to handle a difficult conversation is the same for an accountant, a ICMA, ACCA, or an ICMA qualified person. So there might be opportunities there. And although I do see the benefit, it's good if the trainer has treasury background, yeah, and brings it more to life. Yeah, but there might be some, right, some cross professional organizations that can help each other to really train each other and train each other's staff, because everybody needs to have a more broader understanding.
Some thoughts from me. Look, I'm always going to advocate for soft skills, but ultimately, if you don't know your technical onions, it doesn't matter how well you say it, you're giving bad advice, right? But similarly, I mean, we've touched a lot on AI just now. Technical skills are going to stay very, very important, even when the computers do more and more and more. Because if you don't understand what the computer's doing, hello 2008, all right? So we really need to have a good understanding of what the computer's doing. I don't want to sound like something out of Terminator and Skynet and all the rest of it, but strategic decision making is where soft and technical skills, I hate the phrase soft skills, by the way, I'm sort of more about human dynamics, because there's nothing soft about human dynamics. They're really quite punchy at times. It's where the technical and the human dynamic meets, because without the one, you haven't got anything to stand on. And I've been doing some really interesting work during lockdown with a very senior leadership team in a very large company, where I've actually been sitting in with them as a group while they're making a strategic decision. And we've been doing live coaching of their strategic decision making. It's been fascinating. How are you interacting? Who are you not listening to in the room? Because a good strategic decision is the one where you actually listen and evaluate and make a call. And a lot of the issues come in business where people are afraid to make the call. Yeah, so it's not a soft skill, it's a very hard skill, being the one that makes the call. Yes, you need the data, yes, you need the technical competency, but you also need the guts at the end of the day to stand behind the decision you've made. So yeah, know your onions. Don't be afraid to say it's an onion.
I love that. And I think we definitely need to change it from soft skills, because it's sort of everywhere. So we need to shift.
We're going to change the world, Janet.
Absolutely, all in this webinar session. So just to move on then a little bit. So we've talked about the importance of both technical and soft skills. But just from a qualification perspective, we need to assess them, and we need to know that people coming out the other side can do what our qualifications say they're going to do, can demonstrate those skills and competencies. So, how do we know, how do we ensure then that we're providing people with the skills in such a way that we know that when they go out there, they are actually going to use them, and they're not going to be the folder that sits on, in a cupboard getting dusty for the next 5 years. So Adrian, you went through the advanced diploma assessment. We changed that qualification a year or so ago. we put in a new assessment structure around an exam, a dissertation, and a presentation of that dissertation to a board to try and cover those skills, to try and make sure that our students take the learnings and try and apply them. What were your thoughts on that, and any reflections on, you know, do you use some of those things in your job today?
Yeah, so I thought it was a good mixture. Actually, you know, I think the mixture of the exam, you know, that you had to know your technical onions, as Amanda said earlier, but also, you know, some of the questions asked more of a strategic view as well, from what I recall from the exam last year. So, you know, there was a mixture of technical, but how do you apply that technical experience as well? How do you influence change? And, you know, being the most senior exam that you can do with the ACT, then that's sort of where you need to be influencing boards and decision makers along those sort of lines. You know, the dissertation helps you think about a particular topic in depth. So, you know, it's one that needs to be one that you're passionate about, because there's a lot of work that goes into it, but also it needs to be one that can be used as well. You know, it's not just a theoretical dissertation. It's something that's very practical and can be applied in the real world, and can be of use to, you know, the company you're currently working for, or a future company. You can go, look, I've done this research. This is what I thought. But, you know, the presentation, again, it's an opportunity for you to be grilled by a board. You know, be ready for some questions that are perhaps unexpected, we haven't planned for. But also, you know, the presentation, you know, it's timed. It's a certain allotted time that you need to sort of fit within. You've got to cover certain aspects there as well. So you've really got to think long and hard about, well, what do I include in the presentation? How do I speak about each slide? What messages am I trying to get across? And then obviously the sign of success at the end is if you've conveyed all the messages, and there's few questions. We have a good debate afterwards as well, which is constructive. So, you know, I thought that was a good mixture of the dissertation exam and presentation. When we were going through, you know, there was perhaps more emphasis on softer skills at the residential element of the course that we spoke about earlier. You know, I think some people were more surprised about the softer skills, but, you know, that's something that we've spoken about previously, and that needs to be focused on, because there's no point knowing your technical expertise and not being able to apply it or influence it or get others to, you know, agree with you. So if you have a risk in a business, you need to be able to convey what the risk is and convey what the opportunity or solution is, rather than just being ignored. So, you know, that's very important as well. Some of this as well, though, you know, we've spoken about COVID-19 and online versus physical. One of the other aspects as we went through the advanced diploma is that, you know, a lot of the learning was remote. We had various documents to read. We had various questions and assessments to answer online. We then had various tutorials that were online as well. So the tutors were there and available. We had a group of us doing online tutorials. Now, you know, it was new. You know, I think it was a new experience for many of us as we went through it. But, you know, in the now sort of, in the world of everything being online now, you know, that's perfectly normal. So we had a little chat running by the side, asking different questions, going through the actual work that we were talking about, particular topics. So, you know, that actually worked really well. And, you know, the face-to-face learning has its place, but I actually think that the qualification had the right mixture of exam, dissertation, presentation, and actually a good mixture of online and a little bit of physical face-to-face learning as well. And just coming back to sort of a point that was made earlier as well about, you know, individuals being released for a week for training as well. You know, I think that may change, you know, as we're allowed to travel and stay safely around the world. You're right, Marc, it will be a sort of something for someone to enjoy. Quite often when you're on these training courses, though, you still need to sort of finish the day and get on with the day job and answer a lot of the emails there and the issues, even though you are perhaps locked away and the phone's off. But perhaps there's a blend there, perhaps there's a blend of day release there, and people can spend a day studying and a day away and the like. So, you know, we'll have to see where this goes. But no, So I thought the mixture was good, and online versus physical was good as well. And, you know, I think I'd set the ACT up well for the future, given all the sort of online elements that I went through last year.
Great, thanks, Adrian. Amanda, have you got any thoughts on how we assess?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because what you're talking about is that the technical side of things is very objective. The answer to the question is 42. But then when it comes to behavioural, that's much more subjective. It's about how you're received by the other. And so kind of makes me think about things like music exams, where, you know, your performance is being marked. But then it also makes me think about the way that I'm examined for my psychotherapy masters, and I have to take a tape in and play the tape, and the examiners say, why'd you say that? What was that about? What's going on there? Before I get to take the tape in, I have to have sign off from some very, very senior people who've been in the industry for 30 plus years, who've got countless client hours, you know, psychiatrists, all sorts of people have to say, I have done my work. I have been in training and have reached an allowable standard to be examined. And so there's something here about how do we as a cohort of professionals maintain our professional standard, which is perhaps the measure that the psychological services are having to go through, particularly when there's been lots of less regulated practice in the past on the behavioural side, you know. So maybe there's something here about member validation, sponsor validation, taking in videos of your own performance with your own board, explaining why you chose to present something in a certain way, so that there's something in here about being examined on how you show up as well as what you show up with. I mean, I'm just kind of spitballing right now. It's a really, really interesting question, because ultimately it's going to be a subjective answer.
Yeah.
So hopefully I managed to give you an answer without giving you an answer.
Thank you. Yes, you did answer the question. But exactly, and those are the challenges that we have to sort of think about. Marc, I know you sort of said that you guys have sort of avoided or not really touched the softer skills. How do you handle your assessment side of things? And
well, I mean, you know, it's a good question. When we use like quite traditional multi-choice sort of based exams. We have we either offer exams if you're doing it in a classroom, kind of at the end of the course, you know, and it's kind of tutored by, proctored by the trainer, or there's a live online invigilation service which we use that kind of gives our delegates the flexibility that they require, right? And I think for what we're doing at the moment, you know, you're testing onions, so to speak, this works okay, right? This does work okay. You know, we offer it offers a level of security that ensures the kind of integrity of the results that we need, and it kind of fits purpose. But I mean, it's interesting listening to the others' thoughts about how different industries kind of assess their work. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East, and actually as part of a curriculum and assessment unit. And I was really, really impressed with how, say, the oil and gas industry used evidence-based approach to assessment, right? So they would assess someone's knowledge by watching them operate a machine or correctly implement an HSC procedure, or, you know, even fill in a form, right? Which is basically all evidence-based approach to assessment. And I was really interested in that. And I mean, I would like to be able to explore that a little bit more, how we could sort of adopt that more evidence-based approach to assessment within the ICMA. But I think it's probably some time in coming until we adopt more, you know, incorporate the more softer skills into what we're doing in a more formal sort of way. I think that our needs at the moment are pretty okay.
Absolutely. Chris, any thoughts from you?
Well, I think that Amanda and Marc really mentioned all the issues there already. I think you can train a lot with regards to soft skills. You can use all kinds of games and role play. You could put role play in a game. You could put whatever you want. But in the end, if you want to assess soft skills, I think that really what Amanda and Marc said, maybe the best approach would be to have a live assessment, or as Amanda said, a peer assessment. Who then will sign off that you have completed this, because which is something you can, because if you have a case study on soft skills that you need to answer, it's not the same. In the real life, it's always different. So therefore, maybe that's the way to go.
Absolutely, thank you all. Very interesting thoughts on that. Definitely some things we can think about. So we're getting towards the end of the session now, and we're going to end with a fairly topical question, I suppose. But you know, we're all aware that at the moment Black Lives Matter has come to the fore again recently, and is showing us that there are still significant levels of racism and discrimination across the board. We also work in an industry that is still predominantly white male, certainly at senior levels. For us at the ACT, it's obviously really important. We focus on diversity and inclusion across all our qualifications, events and trainings. But opening it up to all of you, really, what are your thoughts on how we can encourage women and people from other ethnic backgrounds to move into the financial sector and start to shift that balance? Amanda, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I'd rather start by addressing your point on BLM. What Black Lives Matter has done for me in particular has really made me take some time to identify and recognize the points of my privilege, being those things that I just happen to be born with, that, you know, I haven't had to do anything to get. They're just there. I'm white. I live in England. You know, those are two massive points of privilege. I've grown up with a father in the house with two parents. I haven't had to worry about where I'm going to get my food from. And I'm not saying that's the case for everyone that's of a different ethnicity, but it's being aware for each and every one of us of the privilege that we happen to have just been granted through grace. When I think about privilege, it allows me to think about how can I use my privilege to help someone else who doesn't have that privilege. And so I guess to a certain extent it's a clarion call, really. What can you do to share your skills with people who wouldn't have had the privilege that you had? What can you do to level the playing field for somebody who just doesn't happen to have been born with the same privilege and advantage? So whether that's getting our companies to sponsor programs, because we've got to think about a lead time on this. You can't just magic. I mean, we saw that with, I used to work in South Africa, and with the Black Economic Empowerment Act, you can't just magic through a cohort who are going to be able to sit on a board. Okay, you can't just magic through a bunch of individuals who are having the skill set, and companies still need the skill set. But what we've got to do is we've got to look further down the chain, and we've got to take responsibility for encouraging it from school level. You know, yes, today when you are in a meeting and somebody who's not from the highest privilege group, I'm sorry guys, from the white male group, says something and the point is ignored, and then somebody later on who's white and male makes the same point and goes, oh yes, marvelous point. Be the voice that says, and it was a great point when that person said it a few minutes ago, and maybe we should reflect on why we couldn't hear that. So be the pain in the backside for the organization and help the organization you're in to change, because you will get the culture that you tolerate. So that's one thing we can do, but also get ourselves out there, be the ally, speak up, don't be complicit with our silence, but share our privilege, share our knowledge, go down, educate, you know, in less privileged schools, go do, you know, I know colleagues in the Treasury sector who do math tuition in their spare time for kids in inner city schools who don't have access to a quiet place to study. Go and do that, and that will pay off. So there's a now and there's a later to this, but I think the most important things for now is to notice your privilege and work out how you can share it.
Thanks, Amanda. I think that's really, it's important that we do not just stick a band-aid on the problem, and it has to be, you know, something that is the way we deal with things. We change our thoughts for the future. as well. Any thoughts from the others?
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a very, very good point. I think to really combat a lack of diversity, and I think in fairness that there is a perception out there that the financial services industry can be quite homogenous in terms of gender and ethnic and cultural background. I think you do need to take almost an institutional approach to this and really promote diversity and inclusion wherever it's possible. And this is something, I think in terms of ICMA, I know that ICMA specifically make the promotion of diversity and inclusion a very key part of the association's mission. And we try to be really active in encouraging more diverse groups of people to be actively involved in financial services industry. And you can do it in so many ways, right? So ICMA, we promote diversity in the composition of our board, in the composition of our staff. We encourage it in diversity and inclusion in our events through our choice of speakers. We encourage it on our committees through the committee composition. We encourage it through making sure that a lot of the podcasts that we release are specifically addressed topics, including diversity and inclusion, right? We do it by creating groups like, the Future Leaders and the Women's Network and then try and get people to engage in the activities and the events that these groups engage with. And I think that as long as organizations like ACT, like ICMA, are actively promoting these kind of initiatives, that we don't get lazy, and get complacent and go, great, we've increased diversity of females by 5% on the board and we can take a break now for a year and that's great. As long as we're being proactive and we're staying vigilant, then I think we will increasingly see an impact of those activities. And I think that impact will reflect in the diversity of the industry as a whole. And I think hopefully, obviously, that will then be reflected in the diversity of things like, the composition of our classes that we engage in and we teach. So, I think that these, things like Black Lives Matter are incredibly important, if only to remind us, as Amanda says, of our own privilege and that it's just an ongoing thing. You can never become complacent. I think sometimes we just feel that things aren't moving fast enough. And I think that's a really, really common complaint that we have. And in many ways we're right. But as long as we're actively encouraging activities that really promote diversity, then I think we will continue to see an impact.
Absolutely, it's that continuity and less seeing things as a token gesture and a nod to sort of ticking boxes, isn't it? Chris or Adrian, anything you'd like to share?
Yes, I think it's really, we have to look at it from both ways, right? We have to start it up from the bottom and then see what we can do now. And I think that if we look at, we have to get more people from a very varied background to get an interest into Treasury. Yeah, and the question is, how do we do that? And I really like Amanda mentioned volunteering, and maybe we and those at the ACT and others can actually do something like more like a volunteering, but more permanently, more official way that we can get the word about Treasury out and get people interested in it, because it's still a subject that nobody teaches you in school or university and nobody knows about it. And we have to spread the word and make sure that this is a career for you. And we actually need people like you, because we need diversity. Yeah, we need people from different backgrounds, yeah, because we need to have this creativity. And that really comes to the second point. Treasury departments will go through a huge change over the next few years. It was always there. Digitalization was already big before COVID. It will even be bigger now. And therefore, Treasury department and Treasury leaders will look for people to change their department. And if you have the same kind of people sitting in the same boardroom, the same meeting room on your Treasury team, you will always get the same answer. And there's been a lot of research as well that says that diversity actually creates a lot more creativity. But there is one more aspect on that. If you do that, you need to have a culture of speaking up. Yeah, people have to be free to speak whatever is on their mind, because there's no wrong answer. And if everybody speaks their mind, their own experiences, their own feelings, then there will be a lot of creativity created. And that's exactly what we need in order to take Treasury functions forward.
That's a really good point, Chris. I love that idea about the creativity, and that, you know, we're trying to be innovative as well. We're trying to see how to do things differently, how to react to a changing world that's, you know, thrown everything up in the air for most of us. And actually we need to be listening to different ways of doing things and diverse ideas. That's really great. Thank you. Adrian, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of good thoughts and points there. You know, in its simplest form, we need to make it accessible. We need to make it open. You know, it's not a privileged sort of white ethnic or male-dominated area. You know, everyone can contribute to it, as everyone has said. So, how do we make sure it's open and accessible? You know, education is key, but you know, as far as the ACT being educating body, then that's more advanced. So people have already made the choice. It's about getting that accessibility and choice further down the line, so to notify people that that's a career move, and also give them the education early on. So, you know, education and encouragement and openness is key. How that's administered and how that works, you know, it's a difficult piece. So, you know, we all need to be open, and we all need to make sure that we do celebrate diversity and we encourage diversity at all levels. And, you know, it is disheartening to see lack of diversity on various elements, because the people just aren't there and haven't been represented, or haven't had the opportunity. So it's how do we create the opportunity for those to be able to get there.
And this, if I can just come back in for a moment, there is something in this about an acceptance that the privileged group is going to get it wrong, and that there's going to need to be going over it again. You know, this phrase, standing in the gap. Being willing to stand in the gap means that you're going to have to learn and suffer the pain of getting it wrong at times, but not give up. And that's the really key thing to making the stick, is the not giving up. And then, you know, sort of going to the, you know, the minority groups, whether it's women, whether it's people of different ethnicity, different sexuality, doesn't matter what it is, and saying, okay, I got that wrong. What would have been better? How can we make this better together? Come on then, let's go, so that we don't give up.
Thanks, Amanda. I think that's a really lovely place to end, unless anyone has a burning need to add a final comment. But I think this whole session has been fascinating to hear all of your thoughts and views on, you know, where we are today, where we should be going, what we need to think about, how do we address some of the inconsistencies and problems that we are facing. And I hope that our listeners take away some facets of usefulness as well. And for any students and members listening, you know, if you hear anything that you really like or that resonates, get in touch with us and let us know. But, you know, it also for me just reconfirms the power of education and how important it is, and that we need to keep working on it, making it better, and doing what we can. So I'd just like to thank my panelists today, Amanda, Adrian, Marc and Chris, for your time. And I look forward to working with you in ensuring we carry on delivering highest standards of learning at the ACT and with Marc at ICMA. So we hope everyone enjoys this week and the Festival of Treasury Transformation. And that's goodbye from all of us. Thank you.